February 19, 1945. 30,000 United States Marines hit the beaches of a tiny volcanic island halfway between Saipan and Tokyo. Their commanders promised them it would take 5 days, maybe a week at most, to secure this 8-square-mile piece of black sand and rock. 36 days later, when the guns finally fell silent, 6,821 Americans lay dead, and another 19,217 were wounded. The casualty rate was so catastrophic that Iwo Jima became the only Pacific battle where American losses exceeded Japanese losses. For the first time in the war, Marines were dying faster than they could be replaced. This is the story of how a barren island became the bloodiest proving ground in Marine Corps' history. This is the story of General Kuribayashi's revolutionary defense that rewrote the rules of warfare. This is the story of 36 days in hell. This is the Battle of Iwo Jima. By January 1945, the United States was winning the war in the Pacific, but winning slowly and at tremendous cost. General Douglas MacArthur's forces were grinding through the Philippines. Admiral Chester Nimitz's island-hopping campaign had captured the Mariana Sesshin, Tinian, and Guam, giving America the airfields it needed to strike the Japanese home islands directly. But there was a problem, a significant, deadly problem that was costing American lives every single day. The distance from Saipan to Tokyo measured 1,500 miles. For the massive B-29 Superfortress bombers now conducting strategic bombing raids against Japanese cities, this presented 3 critical challenges that planners at Pacific Command couldn't ignore. First, the mission profile was brutal. Flying 3,000 miles round-trip at the edge of the B-29's operational range meant minimal bomb loads. Pilots had to choose between carrying extra fuel or carrying extra bombs. They couldn't do both. This severely limited the effectiveness of each raid. Second, the absence of fighter escort. The P-51 Mustang, America's finest long-range fighter, could fly approximately 1,000 miles. That meant P-29s flew to Tokyo and back completely unprotected, vulnerable to Japanese interceptors for the entire mission. The loss rates reflected this vulnerability. Between 5 and 10% of bombers were being shot down on every raid. Third, there was a small island sitting directly in the flight path. A volcanic rock called Iwo Jima, Japanese for Sulphur Island, that housed Japanese radar stations, giving Tokyo 2 hours advance warning of every incoming raid. It also held Japanese fighter aircraft that attacked damaged B-29s struggling home. American bomber crews called Iwo Jima the unsinkable aircraft carrier, and they hated it with a passion. But what if that island belonged to America instead? Iwo Jima sits 660 miles south of Tokyo, less than half the distance from Saipan. On a map of the Pacific, it looks insignificant, an irregularly shaped island about 5 miles long and 2.5 miles at its widest point. 21 square kilometers. 8 square miles. You could walk around the entire coastline in an afternoon. But strategic value isn't measured in square miles. It's measured in what those miles can do for you. With Iwo Jima in American hands, B-29 mission profiles would transform overnight. The shorter distance meant bombers could carry full bomb loads and still have fuel to spare. P-51 Mustangs could escort the entire mission, turning the tables on Japanese fighters. And those radar stations warning Tokyo? They'd be warning American commanders instead, feeding intelligence about Japanese air defenses. The math was compelling. Capture Iwo Jima, and you cut the Tokyo bombing run in half. You double the payload. You triple the survival rate. You turn a marginal strategic bombing campaign into a devastating air assault that could bring Japan to its knees without ever invading the home islands. There was just one small problem. The island was inhabited by 21,000 highly motivated Japanese soldiers who had spent 7 months turning it into the most heavily fortified position in the Pacific. Before we can understand what happened on Iwo Jima, you need to understand what Iwo Jima is, because the terrain shaped everything that followed. The island is volcanic rock and ash formed by Mount Suribachi, a 169-meter dormant volcano at the southern tip. Picture a pork chop or a misshapen pear. The narrow end terminates at Suribachi, while the wider northern plateau rises into a moonscape of rocky ridges, deep ravines, and twisted volcanic formations. The beaches aren't really beaches. They're terraces of black volcanic ash rising in 15-foot walls from the waterline. The sand is actually volcanic cinder, ground so fine that it behaves like powder. Step onto it, and your boots sink to the ankles. Try to dig a foxhole, and the walls collapse immediately. Tank treads spin uselessly, finding no purchase. Even walking uphill feels like wading through molasses. The island stinks. Sulfuric gases vent from thousands of fumaroles' volcanic cracks, filling the air with the smell of rotten eggs. In some places, the ground is hot to the touch. Water is scarce and tastes like poison. There are no trees to speak of, just scrub brush and wild grass. No natural cover. No shade, no mercy. The Japanese had built 3 airfields on this hellscape. Motoyama No. 1 near the southern beaches, Motoyama No. 2 in the center, and Motoyama No. 3 still under construction in the north. Capturing those airfields was the objective. But the terrain and what the Japanese had done with it would make that objective almost impossibly expensive. In June 1944, Imperial General Headquarters made what might have been their smartest tactical decision of the entire war. They assigned Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi to defend Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi was 53 years old, a career cavalry officer with an unusual background for a Japanese general. From 1928 to 1930, he'd served as a military attaché in Washington, D.C., and later in Canada. He'd traveled across the United States, visiting factories, observing military installations, and studying American industrial capacity. He'd walked the streets of Detroit, watched cars roll off assembly lines, and understood something that many of his colleagues refused to acknowledge. America's industrial might was unstoppable. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, Kuribayashi was one of the few senior officers who privately opposed the war. He knew what was coming. He'd seen America's factories. He understood their capacity for mass production. Fighting America, he believed, was national suicide. But he was also a soldier, and when orders came, he obeyed. His letters home to his wife and children reveal a man who knew he wouldn't survive Iwo Jima. "Do not expect my return," he wrote. "I may not return alive from this assignment, but let me assure you that I shall fight to the best of my ability." There was no bravado in these letters, no samurai romanticism, just quiet resignation and professional determination. When Kuribayashi arrived on Iwo Jima, he found an island defended according to standard Japanese doctrine. Troops positioned at the beaches, plans for banzai charges when the Americans landed, officers preparing for glorious death in futile frontal assaults. He immediately threw out the entire defensive plan. What Kuribayashi did next would revolutionize defensive warfare and make Iwo Jima the deadliest battle per square mile in American military history. The American operation, codenamed Operation Detachment, brought together the largest invasion force yet assembled in the Pacific Theater. Vice Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded the amphibious forces, 495 ships carrying 3 Marine divisions totaling 70,000 men. Holland Howland "Mad" Smith, the legendary commander of Fleet Marine Force Pacific, would oversee ground operations. The assault force consisted of the 4th Marine Division, the 5th Marine Division, and the 3rd Marine Division in reserve. These were elite units, veterans of previous island campaigns. They'd fought at Tarawa, Saipan, Tinian. They knew what to expect from Japanese defenders. They'd seen banzai charges, beach defenses, last stand fighting. Or so they thought. The plan was straightforward textbook amphibious assault doctrine. A massive preliminary bombardment would pulverize Japanese defenses. Marines would land on the southeast beaches, secure the beachhead, capture Mount Suribachi to eliminate the dominating terrain, then sweep north to capture the airfields. 5 days, maybe 7. The optimists gave it 3. Intelligence estimates put Japanese strength at 13,000 to 14,000 troops. Naval officers confidently predicted that the preliminary bombardment would destroy most defensive positions. Marine commanders, more cautious from experience, prepared for stiff resistance but expected Japanese defenders to follow the usual pattern. Defend the beaches, then collapse when the beaches fell. They were wrong on every count. The actual Japanese strength was 21,000. The preliminary bombardment would prove almost completely ineffective. And the beach defenses? They barely existed, because Kuribayashi had no intention of defending the beaches at all. When Lieutenant General Kuribayashi surveyed Iwo Jima's defenses in June 1944, he saw a disaster waiting to happen. Japanese forces were dug in along the beaches, preparing to meet the American landing with immediate, overwhelming force. This was standard Imperial Japanese Army doctrine, the same approach used at Tarawa, Saipan, and a dozen other islands. And it had failed every single time. Kuribayashi understood why. American naval gunfire was simply too powerful. Battleships and cruisers could sit offshore, beyond the range of Japanese coastal guns, and methodically destroy every defensive position they could see. When the Marines landed, they encountered shattered bunkers, cratered beach defenses, and disorganized defenders. The battle was often decided in the first 48 hours. Moreover, the traditional banzai charge, the mass frontal assault that Japanese forces launched when defeat seemed imminent, was military suicide against American firepower. Kuribayashi had studied the reports. At Saipan, 3,000 Japanese soldiers had charged American lines in a final banzai attack. American machine guns, artillery, and rifles had cut them down in minutes. It was brave. It was disciplined. It was tactically worthless. Kuribayashi called a meeting with his senior officers and made an announcement that shocked many of them. There would be no beach defense. There would be no banzai charges. The battle for Iwo Jima would be fought according to entirely new principles. Some officers protested. They argued this violated the Bushido Code, that it dishonored the samurai tradition. Navy commanders on the island were particularly resistant. The Imperial Japanese Navy had its own garrison on Iwo Jima, and Navy officers insisted on maintaining beach defenses and preserving the right to conduct banzai charges. Kuribayashi overruled them all. He issued orders in writing. We shall fight from prepared positions. We shall fight from concealment. We shall not engage in banzai charges. Every man will make the Americans pay 10 times for his life before he falls. This was revolutionary, and it would make Iwo Jima a nightmare. Kuribayashi's defensive concept was elegant in its simplicity. If American naval guns could destroy everything on the surface, then the defense wouldn't be on the surface. It would be underground. He put his entire garrison to work. For 7 months, from June 1944 until February 1945, 21,000 Japanese soldiers became miners. They had picks, shovels, hand drills, and small amounts of blasting explosives. They had no mechanized equipment, no tunnel boring machines, no modern engineering tools. Just muscle, determination, and time. What they built was extraordinary. 11 miles of tunnels, 18 kilometers of interconnected underground passages, some as deep as 90 feet below the surface. The system had multiple levels, 3, sometimes 4 stories deep, with shafts connecting different levels, lateral tunnels connecting different sectors, and hidden exits emerging on hillsides, in ravines, behind rocks. They built 1,500 defensive positions, reinforced concrete blockhouses, small pillboxes, artillery emplacements, command posts, barracks, supply rooms, ammunition magazines, aid stations. Many positions had 3-foot-thick concrete roofs reinforced with steel rails from the island's narrow-gauge railroad. Some had multiple feet of earth piled on top of the concrete. They could withstand direct hits from 16-inch naval shells. The natural terrain helped immensely. Iwo Jima's volcanic rock was soft enough to dig, but strong enough to hold tunnel walls without extensive shoring. Natural caves and lava tubes provided ready-made chambers that just needed to be enlarged and connected. The island's compactness meant that tunnels could link positions across the entire defensive network. Kuribayashi organized the defense into sectors, each with its own command post, supply cache, and interlocking fields of fire. A Japanese soldier could enter a tunnel on the beach, travel underground for a quarter-mile, and emerge on a hillside overlooking the American advance, all without ever exposing himself to observation or fire. Defensive positions meant nothing without weapons. Kuribayashi knew he couldn't match American firepower, but he could make every Japanese weapon count. The island bristled with artillery. 361 artillery pieces ranging from 70mm battalion guns to massive 150mm coastal defense guns. 65 mortar, including 81mm and the fearsome 150mm screaming minis that sounded like banshees as they arced overhead. 94 47mm anti-tank guns, specifically positioned to cover every possible tank approach. 200 machine gun positions, each carefully sighted to create interlocking fields of fire. But it wasn't the quantity of weapons that made Kuribayashi's defense deadly, it was how he positioned them. Traditional Japanese defensive doctrine put artillery in direct fire positions where they could engage ships and landing craft. Kuribayashi forbade this. His artillery would remain hidden, silent during the preliminary bombardment, invisible to American observers. When Marines landed, these guns would fire from concealed positions, then be wheeled back into tunnels before American counter-battery fire could find them. His anti-tank guns weren't positioned to stop tanks on the beach. They were sighted to create kill zones inland, where tanks would be forced into narrow defiles and ravines. His machine guns weren't placed to sweep the beaches. They were positioned to create crossfire zones in the interior, where Marines would have no room to maneuver. Every weapon had multiple firing positions connected by tunnels. Fire from one position, withdraw through the tunnel, emerge at a second position, fire again. American forces would think they'd destroyed a position, only to receive fire from the same sector minutes later. Kuribayashi divided Iwo Jima into 3 defensive zones, each with a specific purpose. The southern zone centered on Mount Suribachi. The extinct volcano dominated the southern tip of the island, rising 169 meters above sea level. Its slopes were honeycombed with tunnels over 1,000 cave positions, machine gun nests, and observation posts. Artillery observers on the summit could see the entire island and direct fire onto any point. Kuribayashi assigned over 800 men to defend Suribachi, not because he expected to hold it indefinitely, but because it would delay the Americans for days while the real defenses were prepared. The central zone contained the first 2 airfields and the most heavily fortified terrain. Here, Kuribayashi positioned his strongest units and his heaviest weapons. The landscape was a maze of rocky ridges, draws, and ravines, natural kill zones, that channeled American attacks into predetermined fire lanes. This was where he planned to bleed the Marines white. The northern zone was the keep, the final redoubt. The northern plateau rose into a jumbled wasteland of volcanic stone, where tunneling was easiest and defensive. Positions were strongest. Here, Kuribayashi built his command post, positioned his reserves, and prepared for the final battle. If the Marines wanted Iwo Jima, they'd have to come north, into terrain that made every yard an ordeal. The tactical concept was simple but brutal. Allow the Americans to land unopposed. Let them struggle through the volcanic sand, thinking they've achieved surprise. Then, when the maximum number of troops and equipment were crowded onto the narrow beaches, open fire with every weapon simultaneously. Create chaos, destroy vehicles, pin the assault force down. Make them pay for every yard. And when the Marines finally broke through one defensive line, they'd find another line waiting deeper inland. And another behind that. Defense in depth, with no banzai charges to waste trained soldiers, no glory-seeking attacks to squander lives. Just methodical, disciplined defensive fighting that would make the Americans pay the maximum cost for minimum gain. By February 1945, Iwo Jima was ready. The tunnels were complete, the weapons were positioned. The garrison, 21,060 men, consisting of Army and Navy personnel, was trained and prepared. Supplies were adequate. Ammunition, food, water, and medical supplies cached throughout the tunnel system. Kuribayashi issued his final order to the garrison. It was simple, direct, and chilling. Each man will make it his duty to kill 10 enemy soldiers before dying. Until we are destroyed to the last man, we shall harass the enemy by guerrilla tactics. No grand speeches about honor. No references to Bushido or samurai tradition. Just a cold calculation. 21,000 defenders times 10 kills, each equals 210,000 American casualties. Even if the actual ratio proved lower, say 5-to-1, that was still over 100,000 casualties to take an 8-square-mile island. Kuribayashi knew this was mathematically unlikely. American firepower would ensure Japanese casualties exceeded American losses. But if his defense could just make the ratio close, if he could make the Americans lose nearly as many men as he had defending, then perhaps the American public would question the cost. Perhaps the strategy of island hopping would falter. Perhaps Japan could negotiate something short of unconditional surrender. It was a thin hope, but it was all he had. On the other side, American intelligence remained oblivious to what awaited. Reconnaissance flights showed airfields, obvious defensive positions, some bunkers. But the tunnels? The underground fortresses? The 11 miles of interconnected passages? None of that appeared in the intelligence briefings. The Americans saw what Kuribayashi wanted them to see, an island that would fall in less than a week. They were about to learn otherwise. The pre-invasion bombardment of Iwo Jima began on December 8, 1944, 74 days before D-Day. B-24 Liberators and B-25 Mitchell bombers from the Marianas hit the island almost daily, dropping over 6,800 tons of bombs. It was the longest sustained bombardment of any Pacific Island target. But strategic bombing against tunnel fortifications proved almost useless. Bombs exploded on the surface, cratering the volcanic ash, destroying buildings, and wrecking the airfields. Underground, the Japanese garrison waited in safety. The bombs were loud, terrifying, occasionally deadly when a lucky hit collapsed a tunnel entrance. But they didn't significantly degrade Kuribayashi's defensive capability. The real test would come from naval gunfire. On February 16th, 3 days before the invasion, the pre-landing bombardment commenced. 6 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 16 destroyers formed a bombardment line offshore and began systematically shelling the island. The battle wagons fired 16-inch shells weighing over 2,000 pounds each. The cruisers added 8-inch shells. The destroyers contributed 5-inch rapid fire. The noise was apocalyptic. Iwo Jima disappeared behind columns of smoke and dust. Shells struck the island at a rate of over 6,000 per day. By the evening of February 18th, the Navy had fired over 40,000 shells, a bombardment tonnage exceeding many European campaigns. Rear Admiral William Blandy, who commanded the bombardment force, was confident. "The Navy has never let you down before," he told Marine commanders, "and it won't let you down this time." But there was a problem. The Navy had allotted only 3 days for the bombardment, February 16, 17, and 18. Marine commanders wanted 10 days minimum, preferably 2 weeks. They argued that Iwo Jima's fortifications were more extensive than any previous target. They needed time to systematically destroy every position. The Navy refused. They had other commitments, other operations. Iwo Jima would get 3 days, take it or leave it. And 3 days wasn't nearly enough. On the surface, Iwo Jima looked devastated. Aerial reconnaissance showed cratered airfields, demolished buildings, smashed coastal guns. But underground, Kuribayashi's garrison waited, largely unscathed. The bombardment had destroyed perhaps 10 to 15% of Japanese positions, mostly above-ground structures that were sacrificial anyway. The tunnels, the deep bunkers, the reinforced pillboxes, these remained intact and fully operational. On the evening of February 18th, Marine commanders reviewed reconnaissance photos and prepared for D-Day. They saw destruction and assumed success. Tomorrow morning, 30,000 Marines would discover the truth. At dawn on February 19, 1945, the amphibious task force gathered off the southeast coast of Iwo Jima. 482 Elvita's landing vehicle, tracked, nicknamed Amtrax, bobbed in the waves, each loaded with 20 Marines and their equipment. 8 battalions preparing to hit 7,000 yards of beach in coordinated assault waves. The plan divided the landing beaches into 7 sectors, coded from north to south. Green Beach, Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, Yellow Beach 1, Yellow Beach 2, Blue Beach 1, and Blue Beach 2. The 4th Marine Division would land on the yellow and blue beaches to the east, while the 5th Marine Division would take the red and green beaches to the west. The immediate objective: push inland, cut the island in half, isolate Mount Suribachi, then sweep north to capture the airfields. At 0645, the bombardment intensified. Battleships hammered the beaches with maximum rate fire. Carrier aircraft F-4U Corsairs and F-6F Hellcats screened in at wave-top height, strafing and bombing suspected positions. Rocket-equipped landing craft surged toward shore, unleashing rippling salvos of 4.5-inch rockets. The island was barely visible through the smoke and dust. At 0830, the first wave of Amtrax formed up 2,000 yards offshore. The Navy bombardment continued, walking its fire inland as the first wave approached. At 0859, the guns fell silent. In that sudden, eerie quiet, the Amtrax gunned their engines and surged toward shore. H-hour was 0900. The Battle of Iwo Jima had begun. The first Amtrax ground onto the southeastern beaches at exactly 0900. Marines scrambled out, weapons ready, expecting immediate fire. Instead, they encountered silence. The only sounds were the rumble of Amtrak engines, the shouts of NCOs organizing squads, the distant thump of naval guns firing further inland. The beach was worse than expected. The volcanic ash wasn't sand, it was loose cinder that offered no footing. Men sank to their ankles with every step. Moving uphill from the waterline felt like climbing a sand dune in slow motion. Equipment was heavy, and the weight drove boots even deeper into the ash. Worse, the beach terraces rose in steep walls 15 to 20 feet high. These weren't obstacles on the beach, they were the beach. Volcanic ash compressed by centuries of wave action into nearly vertical slopes. Amtrax couldn't climb them. Tanks would have to find the few natural ramps or wait for engineers to bulldoze passages. But there was still no enemy fire. Marines dug in as best they could, though the loose ash made proper foxholes impossible. The walls kept collapsing, sliding back into the hole as fast as they could dig. Platoon leaders checked their watches. 5 minutes since landing, 10 minutes. Still no fire. By 0915, the second wave was landing. By 0925, the third wave. By 0945, 8,000 Marines were ashore, along with tanks, artillery pieces, ammunition, and supplies. The beach was getting crowded, dangerously crowded, and Marines were beginning to push inland. That's when Kuribayashi gave the order to fire. At approximately 1,000 hours, The entire island exploded with fire. Every weapon Kuribayashi possessed opened up simultaneously. 150mm coastal guns, 120mm mortar, 81mm mortar, 47mm anti-tank guns, and hundreds of machine guns. The effect was catastrophic. Artillery shells burst among the crowded landing beaches. Mortar, firing on pre-registered coordinates, dropped with deadly accuracy into assembly areas. Machine gun fire swept across the volcanic ash, cutting down Marines who had no cover, no concealment, nowhere to hide. Anti-tank guns engaged the Sherman tanks struggling through the soft ground, scoring hits at point-blank range. The Marines had trained for Japanese resistance at the waterline. They'd practiced assaulting beach fortifications, clearing bunkers, fighting through obstacles. But this, being allowed to land unopposed, then being hit from all sides once they were ashore, this was new. This was disorienting. This was a carefully planned killing zone, and they were in the center of it. The volcanic ash became a death trap. You couldn't dig into it for protection. You couldn't run through it quickly to escape the fire. Every step was an effort, every movement slow and exhausted. Men fell wounded, and the ash absorbed them, making it hard for corpsmen to find casualties. The beach became chaos. Wounded Marines screamed for corpsmen. Officers tried to rally their units and push forward, because staying on the beach meant death. Radio operators called for naval gunfire support, but many radios were damaged or buried in ash. Amtraks tried to evacuate wounded, but came under heavy fire, and several were destroyed at the waterline. The call went up continuously, "Corpsmen! Corpsmen!" The Navy corpsmen medics attached to Marine units ran through the fire without hesitation, dragging wounded men to shelter, applying tourniquets, administering morphine. The corpsmen were no rank insignia and carried no weapons, but the Japanese shot them anyway. The casualty rate among corpsmen would be catastrophic. Despite the carnage, Marine discipline held. Small unit leaders, sergeants and lieutenants got their men moving. The only way out was forward. Staying on the beach meant annihilation. The 5th Marine Division on the western beaches had the immediate objective of isolating Mount Suribachi. The 28th Marines, commanded by Colonel Harry the Horse Liversedge, began pushing south toward the volcano's base. Progress was measured in yards. Japanese fire came from countless concealed positions, pillboxes hidden in the volcanic rock, machine gun nests dug into hillsides, artillery firing from the north. Engineers and demolition teams moved forward with the infantry, attacking Japanese positions with satchel charges, flamethrowers, and grenades. The technique that would become standard on Iwo Jima began to emerge. Locate the firing position, suppress it with rifle and machine gun fire, assault with grenades or explosives, then burn it out with flamethrowers. Each position took minutes to hours to reduce. There were hundreds of positions. On the eastern beaches, the 4th Marine Division pushed toward Motoyama Airfield No. 1. Here the terrain was marginally better, flatter. At least, but the Japanese resistance was just as intense. The division's objective was to cut across the island's narrow waist, separating the northern defenses from Suribachi. But Japanese artillery from the high ground to the north turned the advance into a continuous ordeal. Tanks were supposed to provide the breakthrough power, but the volcanic ash stopped them cold. Treads spun uselessly, engines overheated, and many tanks simply bogged down within yards of leaving their landing craft. Engineers worked frantically to create paths using metal-pierced plank matting, but this took time, and time was measured in casualties. By 1400 hours, 5 hours after the landing, some units had advanced 700 yards inland. Others had gone barely 200 yards. The entire assault force was compressed into a narrow strip of coastline, less than 1,000 yards deep, under continuous artillery and mortar fire. Japanese observers on Mount Suribachi could see everything and called down fire with brutal precision. As darkness fell on February 19th, The Marines established a defensive perimeter and dug in for the night. 8 battalions were ashore, roughly 30,000 men, holding a beachhead approximately 4,000 yards wide and 1,000 yards deep, barely 1 square mile of the 8 square mile island. The cost had been staggering. By evening casualty reports, 2,420 Marines had been killed, wounded, or were missing, nearly 8% of the assault force in a single day. Hospital ships offshore received a steady stream of wounded throughout the night. Surgical teams worked by floodlight, performing amputations, extracting shrapnel, treating burns from flamethrowers and phosphorus. Blood plasma ran low. Bandages ran low. On the beach, Marines prepared for the expected nighttime banzai charge. Japanese forces had launched these attacks on every previous island. Massed infantry charges designed to break through American lines in the darkness, creating panic and confusion. Marines checked their ammunition, fixed bayonets, and waited. The attack never came. Instead, the night filled with a different kind of horror, harassing fire. Japanese mortar dropped sporadically into the American perimeter all night long. Not a sustained barrage, just random shells every few minutes, enough to prevent sleep, to keep everyone on edge. Occasionally a machine gun would open fire from an unexpected position, forcing a response, then fall silent before counter-battery fire could locate it. This was Kuribayashi's plan in action. No wasteful banzai charges, no glorious deaths, just steady, disciplined pressure. Wear them down, make them pay. And in the tunnels beneath the island, Japanese soldiers cleaned their weapons, redistributed ammunition, and prepared for the next day's fighting. They'd killed and wounded nearly 2,500 Americans in the first day. Kuribayashi's orders were clear: do it again tomorrow. The morning of D+1 February 20th began with dense fog rolling in from the sea, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. Marines welcomed it initially. At least Japanese artillery observers couldn't see to direct fire, but the fog cut both ways. Units became separated, disoriented. Japanese infiltrators used the cover to creep within grenade range of Marine positions. The 28th Marines, 5,000 men under Colonel Liversedge, had the mission of isolating and capturing Mount Suribachi. The plan was straightforward: push south across the narrow neck of the island, cutting off the volcano from reinforcement, then reduce it position by position until resistance collapsed. The reality was anything but straightforward. The terrain leading to Suribachi's base was a nightmare of broken volcanic rock, deep ravines, and natural strongpoints. Every fold in the ground concealed Japanese fighting positions. Every rocky outcrop hid a machine gun nest. The 800 Japanese defenders weren't trying to hold ground. They were trying to kill Marines, and the terrain gave them countless opportunities. The fighting developed into a brutal close-quarters battle. Small units, squads, and fire teams would advance toward a suspected position, take fire, go to ground, then work their way forward using fire and maneuver. Riflemen would suppress the position while a demolition team crawled forward with satchel charges or pole charges, explosives tied to the end of long poles that could be shoved into cave mouths or pillbox firing slits. Flamethrowers became essential. The portable flamethrower M222, affectionately called the blowtorch, shot a stream of napalm 40 to 50 yards. It could clear a cave in seconds, could silence a pillbox, could kill defenders who thought they were safe in reinforced bunkers. But using it required getting close, and flamethrower operators had a short life expectancy. Japanese defenders recognized them by their distinctive tanks and targeted them immediately. The pattern repeated hundreds of times each day. Locate the enemy position, suppress with rifle fire, maneuver closer, assault with explosives or flame, verify the position was destroyed, then move to the next position. Each position took 5 to 30 minutes. There were hundreds of positions between the beach and Suribachi's base. By February 21st D+2, the 28th Marines had cut across the island's southern neck, isolating Suribachi. But isolating the volcano and capturing it were two entirely different challenges. Mount Suribachi wasn't a single position, it was a fortress. The entire mountain, from sea level to the 169-meter summit, was honeycombed with over 1,000 cave positions, pillboxes, observation posts, and fighting positions. Artillery pieces were positioned in caves with wide fields of fire, able to shell any point on the island. Machine gun nests covered every approach. Mortar tubes fired from concealed positions, their crews safe in deep caves between fire missions. Colonel Kanehiko Onsuchi commanded the Suribachi garrison, 800 men from various units, mostly Navy personnel but with some Army troops mixed in. Atsuchi knew he couldn't hold Suribachi indefinitely. He knew the American firepower would eventually overwhelm his defenses. But Kuribayashi's orders were clear. Don't hold ground, kill Americans. Make them pay maximum cost for minimum gain. So Atsuchi prepared a defense that would make every yard up that volcano a separate battle. The approaches to Suribachi were covered by interlocking fields of fire. You couldn't advance without being exposed to multiple positions simultaneously. If you attacked one cave, fire came from two others protecting it. If you destroyed one pillbox, another opened fire from a different angle. The Japanese had spent months preparing these positions, mapping every field of fire, ensuring mutual support. The Marines adapted. They learned that frontal assaults were suicide. Instead, they developed what they called the corkscrew and blowtorch method. Identify a position, work around to the flank if possible, suppress with rifle and machine gun fire, then hit it simultaneously with explosives and flame. Tanks provided covering fire when they could get into position. Artillery and naval gunfire plastered the mountain continuously. But the real work, the dirty, dangerous, exhausting work fell to the infantry. Squad by squad, they worked their way up Suribachi's slopes. Private First Class Donald Roll was part of that advance. On February 21st, his squad was attacking a pillbox when a Japanese grenade landed among them. Rule threw himself on it, absorbing the blast with his body, saving his squad. He was 21 years old. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. This was the rhythm of combat on Suribachi. Moments of terror, long periods of exhaustion, brief intervals of rest. The Marines rotated units through the assault, pulling exhausted squads back for a few hours while fresh units took over. But fresh was relative. Everyone was running on adrenaline and willpower. By the morning of February 23rd D+4, the 28th Marines had fought their way to Suribachi's upper slopes. Organized resistance was collapsing. Many Japanese defenders were dead. Others had retreated into deep caves, where they'd wait for the Marines to pass, then emerge to fight again. At 0800, Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, commanding 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, called for a patrol to climb to the summit. If they made it, they'd raise the American flag, the universal signal that ground had been taken and held. First Lieutenant Harold Schreier led the 40-man patrol. They carried weapons, ammunition, and a small American flag that Battalion Adjutant 1st Lieutenant George Wells had acquired from LST 779. The flag measured 54 by 28 inches, not huge, but large enough to be visible. The patrol moved cautiously up the volcano's northern slope, expecting fire from cave positions at any moment. Incredibly, they encountered almost no resistance. A few Japanese soldiers appeared and were quickly killed. Most of the defenders were dead or too deep in the cave system to intercept the patrol. At 10:20 hours, Schreier's patrol reached the summit. They found a length of Japanese pipe, lashed it upright, and attached the flag. Marines across the island looked up and saw the stars and stripes flying on Suribachi. Ships offshore sounded their whistles and horns. Men cheered. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal, visiting the fleet offshore, witnessed the flag raising and turned to Holland Smith. This means a Marine Corps for the next 500 years. But Colonel Johnson wanted a larger flag, something every man on the island could see clearly. He sent runners to find a bigger flag and ordered it carried to the summit. Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, had a larger flag 96 by 56 inches acquired from a Navy LST. At 1400 hours, Sergeant Michael Strank led a group of Marines carrying this flag to the summit. Corporal Harlan Block, Private First Class Ira Hayes, Private First Class Franklin Sousley, Private First Class Renee Gagnon, and Navy Corpsman John Doc Bradley. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal followed them up. He'd already photographed the first flag raising, but wanted more shots. When the second flag party arrived, Rosenthal positioned himself and waited. The Marines found another piece of pipe, attached the flag, and began raising it. Rosenthal, not even looking through his viewfinder, swung his camera up and pressed the shutter. That single photograph, 6 men straining to raise the flag against a windswept sky, would become the most reproduced image in history. It would win Rosenthal the Pulitzer Prize. It would become a symbol of American determination, sacrifice, and victory. It would be made into the Marine Corps' War Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. But for the men in the photograph, there was no celebration. They scrambled back down the volcano to rejoin their units. The battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. Of the 6 flag raisers, 3, Harlan Block, Mike Strank, and Franklin Sousley, would be dead within 10 days. Ira Hayes, John Bradley, and Renee Gagnon would survive, but would carry the weight of that moment and the memory of their fallen comrades for the rest of their lives. By February 24th, Mount Suribachi was nominally secured. Marines held the summit and controlled the major cave systems. But secured was a relative term. Japanese soldiers remained in deep caves, emerging at night to launch small attacks or to escape north through tunnels. Marines would continue fighting pockets of resistance on Suribachi for days. The strategic benefit was immediate. American artillery observers on the summit could now see the entire island and direct fire onto Japanese positions. The psychological boost was significant. Every Marine on the island could look south and see that flag. But the tactical reality remained grim. Capturing Suribachi had taken 4 days and cost roughly 500 killed and wounded. That was 1/10 of the island and arguably the easiest 10th. The rest of Iwo Jima lay to the north, where the real defenses waited, where Kuribayashi waited, where the meat grinder was about to earn its name. The 4th and 5th Marine Divisions regrouped, integrated the 3rd Marine Division into the line, and prepared to push north. They'd learned hard lessons in the first 4 days. They'd developed tactics for attacking fortified positions. They'd seen what worked and what didn't, but nothing could prepare them for what came next. Because the southern battles had been the prologue. The story of Iwo Jima, the real story, was about to unfold in the volcanic wasteland to the north. If Mount Suribachi was a fortress, the northern 2/3 of Iwo Jima was an entire castle complex. The terrain rose gradually from the central airfields into a chaotic jumble of rocky ridges, steep ravines, and volcanic formations that seemed designed by nature to favor defenders. There were no roads, no clear lines of advance, no obvious objectives except that ridge over there, which would turn out to hide another ridge behind it, and another behind that. Every ravine was a potential kill zone. Every rocky outcrop could conceal a machine gun nest. Every innocent-looking patch of ground might hide a cave entrance. The rock itself was treacherous, a volcanic stone called scoria that shattered under artillery fire into razor-sharp fragments. Foxholes had to be blasted with explosives. The rock was too hard to dig. Tank treads ground themselves down to nothing on the abrasive surface. Walking was exhausting. The rough terrain made every step an effort, and full combat loads, rifle, ammunition, grenades, water, rations, weighed 60 pounds or more. And woven through this nightmare landscape were Kuribayashi's defenses. Not a single defensive line, but a network of mutually supporting positions extending back hundreds of yards. Take one position, and fire came from 3 others. Destroy one strongpoint, and another opened fire from a cave you hadn't even seen. It was defense in depth at its most sophisticated and most lethal. This was where the Americans would bleed. In the northeastern sector of the island, the terrain formed what would become the most infamous killing ground in Marine Corps' history. 3 mutually supporting positions created a defensive complex so strong, so resistant to assault, that Marines simply called it the meat grinder. The complex consisted of 3 features: Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the amphitheater. Together, they formed a triangular defensive zone approximately 800 yards on each side. Attacking any one position exposed you to fire from the other 2. Attacking all 3 simultaneously spread your forces too thin. There was no good option, only bad options and worse options. Hill 382 stood 116 meters above sea level, not particularly high, but dominant over the surrounding terrain. Its real name came from its elevation in feet, but Marines called it Meat Grinder Hill because of what happened there. The hill was a warren of at least 120 interconnected caves on 3 levels. Japanese defenders could fire from one level, retreat into tunnels, emerge on a different level or a different side of the hill entirely, and resume firing. You couldn't just capture the summit, you had to clear every cave, every tunnel, every position, and then guard against defenders returning through tunnels you hadn't found. The 21st Marines drew the assignment to capture Hill 382. They attacked on February 28D+9 and would fight continuously for 4 days before securing it on March 3rd. The advance was measured in yards per day, 50 yards on a good day, 20 yards on a bad day, sometimes less. The casualties were catastrophic. By the time Hill 382 fell, the 21st Marines had lost over 1,500 men, more than half the regiment's strength killed and wounded. The fighting developed its own terrible rhythm. Dawn, artillery preparation, aircraft strikes, naval gunfire. Morning, infantry assault, pushing forward under covering fire from tanks and supporting units. Afternoon, close combat with explosives and flamethrowers. Evening, consolidate gains, prepare for nighttime infiltration. Night, stand watch, fight off probes, endure harassing fire, then repeat. Day after day after day. Turkey Knob was a 30-meter rocky outcrop adjacent to Hill 382. Name came from its shape. It supposedly resembled a turkey's head and neck, though no one fighting there cared about the resemblance. What they cared about was the 150mm artillery piece hidden inside it. The Japanese had carved out the interior of Turkey Knob and mounted a coastal defense gun inside. The gun could fire in nearly 360 degrees through a wide opening in the rock. It could shell any point on Motoyama Airfield No. 2. It could engage American tanks. It could drop high explosive shells into assembly areas. And because the gun was inside solid rock, it was nearly invulnerable to counter battery fire. American artillery hammered Turkey Knob for days. Naval gunfire blasted it. Aircraft bombed it. The rock absorbed it all, and the gun kept firing. Finally, on March 3rd, combat engineers from the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, came up with a solution. They couldn't destroy Turkey Knob with artillery, so they'd do it with explosives. They hauled 4,000 pounds of C4 plastic explosive up to the base of Turkey Knob, placed it in crevices and caves, rigged detonators, and blew the entire top off the formation. The explosion could be heard across the island. When the smoke cleared, Turkey Knob was gone, and the gun inside it was buried under tons of rock. The amphitheater was a natural bowl-shaped depression, approximately 400 meters in diameter, with rocky walls rising on all sides. 300 Japanese defenders held positions around the rim and on the floor. Any American unit entering the amphitheater came under fire from multiple directions. Simultaneously, It was a natural kill zone with no cover and no concealment. The Marines tried frontal assault. The units were shredded by crossfire and forced to withdraw. They tried flanking movements. Japanese positions on the rim suppressed them. They tried artillery and airstrikes, but the rocky terrain absorbed the explosions without destroying the positions. The solution required combined arms. Tanks provided covering fire while infantry assaulted from multiple directions simultaneously, supported by flamethrower teams and demolition squads. It took days of continuous fighting, and the casualty rate was appalling. But gradually the amphitheater was cleared position by position. By March 10th D+19, the meat grinder complex had been broken. Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the amphitheater were in American hands. The cost: thousands of casualties across multiple regiments, entire companies reduced to platoon strength, battalions that started with 1,000 men now fielding 300. But there were still more hills to the north. More ridges, more caves. Kuribayashi's defense was far from finished. In the west-central sector of the island, another defensive strongpoint emerged around a series of ridges that came to be called Nishi Ridge after its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Baron Takeki Nishi. Nishi was a remarkable figure, a graduate of the Imperial Japanese Army Academy who'd competed in the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics as an equestrian, winning the gold medal in show jumping. He'd traveled extensively in the United States before the war, spoke some English, and reportedly had American friends. When war came, he'd set aside his personal connections and done his duty as a Japanese officer. Now he commanded a tank unit on Iwo Jima, though there was precious little opportunity for tank warfare. Instead, Nishi had dispersed his men throughout the ridge system, fighting as infantry from prepared positions. The terrain here was a maze of small ravines and rocky spines, perfect for defense. Nishi's 800 men held a sector perhaps 400 yards square, but it would take the Marines a week to clear it. The fighting for Nishi Ridge began March 1st and continued through March 8th. The pattern was familiar by now. Locate enemy positions, suppress with supporting fire, assault with flamethrowers and explosives, clear the position, move to the next. But Nishi's defenses were particularly well constructed, with multiple fallback positions connected by tunnels. Marines would clear a cave system, only to receive fire from the same area hours later when Japanese troops returned through unmapped tunnels. Artillery support was crucial. The 105mm howitzers of the 13th Marines fired thousands of shells into the Nishi Ridge complex. Forward observers crept within yards of Japanese positions to call down fire accurately. The coordination between infantry and artillery was remarkable. Fire missions directed onto targets less than 100 yards from friendly troops, with shells landing precisely on target. Baron Nishi died somewhere in this fighting. Exactly when and where remains unknown. His body was never found, likely buried in a collapsed tunnel or cave. After the war, the exact circumstances of his death became a minor historical mystery. What's certain is that he fought to the end, refusing surrender, embodying the same code that drove every Japanese defender on Iwo Jima. By March 8th, Nishi Ridge was secured, though at tremendous cost. The 5th Marine Division units that assaulted the ridge suffered over 2,000 casualties in 1 week of fighting. Some companies were down to 40 or 50 effectives, less than a third of authorized strength. And still the island wasn't secured. Still there were more defensive positions to the north. Still Kuribayashi's command post remained intact, directing resistance from deep underground. The technique of cave warfare. By the second week of fighting, Marines had developed a sophisticated if brutally dangerous technique for clearing Japanese positions. It wasn't in any manual. It was battlefield innovation born of necessity. Step 1. Identify the position. This was often the hardest part. Japanese positions were superbly camouflaged. Cave entrances were hidden behind rocks or brush. Pillboxes were built to blend into the terrain. The only way to find them was often to draw fire, to send a patrol forward and see where the shooting came from. Men died in this reconnaissance. Step 2. Suppress and isolate. Once a position was located, it had to be suppressed. Riflemen and machine gunners would pour fire into the opening to keep defenders' heads down. If possible, tanks would be brought up to add their 75mm guns to the suppressive fire. The goal was to prevent the defenders from firing back while the assault team maneuvered closer. Simultaneously, other units would check flanks and rear approaches. If the position had multiple entrances, and most did, all had to be covered. Missing even one could be fatal when defenders escaped through a back entrance and counterattacked. This was where men earned their pay and often died. A 4-man assault team would approach the position under covering fire. 2 men with Thompson submachine guns or BARs, Browning automatic rifles, 1 man with a flamethrower, and 1 man with demolitions, satchel charges or pole charges. The technique was called corkscrew and blowtorch. The demolition man would place an explosive charge at or near the entrance, the corkscrew to uncork the position. After the explosion, the flamethrower operator, the blowtorch, would send a stream of burning napalm into the opening. The napalm did more than burn. It consumed oxygen, suffocating anyone deep inside. This sounds straightforward described in words. In practice, it meant approaching within yards of enemy positions, often under fire, carrying 60 pounds of fuel on your back, flamethrower, or explosives that could detonate if hit. Flamethrower operators had the shortest life expectancy of any Marine specialty. They were priority targets. Japanese soldiers recognized the distinctive tanks and aimed for them specifically. After the assault, the Thompson gunners would enter the position to verify it was clear. This was terrifying work. Entering a smoke-filled cave, not knowing if enemy soldiers were still alive inside, not knowing if the tunnel connected to other positions. Men had to fight in near-total darkness, often by sound and instinct. And even after a position was cleared, it had to be watched. Japanese soldiers hiding deeper in tunnel systems would wait for the Marines to leave, then return to the position and resume fighting. The only solution was demolition, using explosives to collapse tunnels and seal caves. But with 11 miles of tunnels on the island, this was impossible to do comprehensively. By mid-March, most Marine units had been in continuous combat for 3 to 4 weeks. The psychological and physical strain was reaching breaking points. Combat fatigue, what we'd now call PTSD or acute stress reaction, became epidemic. Men who'd functioned fine for weeks would suddenly crack. Some became catatonic, unable to move or respond. Others became hysterical, unable to stop shaking or crying. A few became violent, requiring restraint by their comrades. The symptoms varied, but the cause was constant: unrelenting stress, the knowledge that any step might trigger a mine, that any cave might house enemy soldiers, that any moment might bring a mortar shell or a sniper's bullet. The human nervous system wasn't designed for this level of sustained threat, and it broke down accordingly. Division psychiatrists treated hundreds of combat fatigue cases. Most men were evacuated to hospital ships for rest and sedation. Some returned to their units after a few days. Others never returned, the psychological damage too severe. The term thousand-yard stare entered military vocabulary on Iwo Jima, the blank, emotionless expression of men who'd seen too much, endured too much, and had nothing left to give. Physical exhaustion compounded the psychological strain. Marines were living on minimal sleep, a few hours per night, often interrupted by alerts or harassing fire. Rations were cold G rations eaten from cans. Water was rationed and tasted of chemicals. Personal hygiene was non-existent. Men went weeks without bathing. Uniforms rotted on their bodies. Dysentery became common. And the casualties kept mounting. Every day, friends died. Every day, the company roster grew shorter. Original units that landed with 200 men now had 80, 60, 40. Replacements arrived but often died before anyone learned their names. The survivors became numb to death because feeling every loss would be unbearable. While the infantry bore the brunt of the fighting, other arms contributed critically to the battle's outcome. Artillery worked around the clock. The 105mm and 155mm howitzers fired thousands of shells daily, often at targets less than 200 yards from friendly troops. Forward observers accompanied every assault, calling fire missions via radio. The accuracy was remarkable, shells landing within meters of specified targets, often in situations where a 50-meter error would kill Americans instead of Japanese. Naval gunfire continued throughout the battle. Destroyers and cruisers fired on call, though their effectiveness diminished as fighting moved into the northern ridges where the terrain made spotting difficult. Still, the psychological effect was valuable, the knowledge that massive firepower was available on request. Air support came from carriers offshore. F-4U Corsairs and F-6F Hellcats conducted close air support missions, dropping 500-pound bombs and napalm on Japanese positions. The coordination was primitive by later standards, often just colored smoke marking the target, but the pilots were skilled and brave, making runs at treetop height to ensure accuracy. Tanks were indispensable, though the terrain limited their mobility. The M4 Sherman's 75mm gun could destroy pillboxes that rifle fire couldn't touch. More importantly, flame-throwing Shermans, Zippos or Ronsons could pump napalm into caves from relative safety. Tank crews suffered high casualties. Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns were deadly, but the tanks kept coming. Combat engineers performed unglamorous but vital work, clearing mines, bulldozing roads, blowing up strongpoints, building bridges over ravines. The engineers were often in the front lines, sometimes ahead of infantry, identifying obstacles and clearing paths. Their casualty rate rivaled the infantry's. By March 11th D+20, the Marines had secured the southern two-thirds of Iwo Jima. The airfields were in American hands. The meat grinder had been broken. Nishi Ridge had fallen. But the northern tip, perhaps 1 square mile, remained in Japanese hands. And in that final square mile, Kuribayashi had concentrated his remaining forces for a last stand. The terrain here was the worst on the island: rocky gorges, steep ridges, and a defensive position called Kitano Point where the final desperate fighting would occur. Kuribayashi's command post was somewhere in this sector, deep underground, still directing what remained of his garrison. The Americans brought up every available unit. The 3rd Marine Division, initially held in reserve, now joined the 4th and 5th Divisions in line. 3 divisions, over 40,000 men compressed into a front barely 1,000 yards wide, pushing north into a pocket defended by perhaps 3,000 Japanese soldiers. Progress was agonizingly slow, 10 yards per day, 20 on a good day. Each position had to be fought for individually. There was no longer any possibility of maneuver. The front was too narrow. It was just straight ahead slugging, position by position, until resistance collapsed. On March 21st, D+30 Navy Seabees, operating bulldozers, made a gruesome discovery while clearing ground for a cemetery. They uncovered a large cave complex that had been sealed by shellfire. Inside were over 800 Japanese dead, killed not by American weapons, but by suffocation when the cave entrance collapsed. The bodies had been there for days in the tropical heat. The smell was indescribable. It was a reminder that for every Japanese soldier killed in combat, others died invisibly in collapsed tunnels, from starvation, from lack of water, or from wounds without medical care. Kuribayashi's strategy of underground defense protected his men from bombardment, but trapped them when caves collapsed or supplies ran out. Throughout the battle, Kuribayashi had forbidden banzai charges. He'd maintained discipline, kept his men under control, conducted a methodical defensive battle. But by March 25th, D+34, his situation was hopeless. Perhaps 300 men remained alive and effective. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Food was gone. Water was gone. The end was inevitable. That night, Kuribayashi released his men from their orders. Those who wished to conduct a final attack had his permission. Around 03:00 on March 26th, approximately 250 to 300 Japanese soldiers emerged from the northern ridges and attacked American positions near Kitano Point. But this wasn't a typical banzai, charge-screaming, sword-waving, chaotic mass assault. This was a disciplined night attack conducted in near silence. The Japanese infiltrated American lines using stealth and darkness. They bypassed forward positions and struck rear area units, headquarters elements, artillery batteries, supply dumps. The fighting was confused and desperate. Some Americans were killed in their sleep. Others fought hand-to-hand in the darkness. The Japanese penetrated deep into the American rear before organized resistance stopped them. By dawn, the attack was over. Over 200 Japanese soldiers lay dead. American casualties exceeded 150 killed and wounded. It was the most successful Japanese attack of the entire battle, and ultimately meaningless. The Americans controlled the island. The battle was over. Kuribayashi's fate remains unknown. He was never captured and his body was never identified. He likely died in this final attack or shortly thereafter, possibly committing ritual suicide. His final message to Tokyo, sent March 21st, read, "We have not eaten or drunk for 5 days, but our fighting spirit is still high." On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secured. 36 days after the first Marines landed, 6,821 Americans dead, 19,217 wounded. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps' history was over. But isolated Japanese soldiers would continue fighting from caves for days, even weeks. The last 2 Japanese soldiers wouldn't surrender until 1949, 4 years after the war ended. Iwo Jima had cost nearly everything the island's defenders had to give, and more than the Americans ever expected to pay. The final casualty figures from Iwo Jima were staggering by any measure. American losses: 6,821 killed in action, 19,217 wounded, and several hundred missing. Total: 26,038 casualties out of approximately 70,000 Marines committed to the battle. That's a 37% casualty rate. More than 1 in 3 Marines who landed on Iwo Jima was killed or wounded. The losses weren't evenly distributed. Some units suffered over 50% casualties. The 4th Marine Division lost 9,098 men killed and wounded. The 5th Marine Division lost 7,896. The 3rd Marine Division, committed later in the battle, still lost 2,742. Individual regiments were decimated. The 28th Marines, which captured Mount Suribachi, suffered over 50% casualties. Some companies that landed with 250 men ended the battle with fewer than 50. The casualty rate per day was the highest of any Pacific battle, 724 casualties per day on average. By comparison, Okinawa, much larger and longer battle, averaged 610 casualties per day. D-Day in Normandy averaged approximately 1,500 casualties per day across all Allied forces, but spread among many more divisions. Japanese losses were even more catastrophic. Of the 21,060 men defending Iwo Jima, approximately 20,000 died. Only 1,083 were captured, and most of those were wounded men unable to resist or commit suicide. The Japanese casualty rate was approximately 95%. This was by far the highest percentage of Japanese prisoners taken in any Pacific battle, though still a tiny fraction of the garrison. The prisoners included surprisingly few officers. Most Japanese officers committed suicide rather than surrender. Those who were captured provided valuable intelligence about the tunnel systems and defensive plans. but their numbers were too small to significantly aid operations. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration for valor, is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of one's life above and beyond the call of duty. The standards are extraordinarily high. The decoration is rare. At Iwo Jima, 27 Medals of Honor were awarded, 14 posthumously. That's more than in any other single battle in American history. More than Normandy, more than Gettysburg, more than the Bulge. To put it in perspective, the entire Vietnam War, spanning nearly 2 decades, saw 246 Medals of Honor awarded. Iwo Jima 36 days produced 27. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, summed it up in words that would become the Marine Corps' unofficial motto. Among the Americans who served on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue. Some of these medals tell stories that defy belief. Corporal Tony Stein, a former Dayton, Ohio toolmaker, rigged up a personal machine gun from a wrecked aircraft. On D-Day, he single-handedly attacked 20 Japanese positions, killing at least 20 enemy soldiers. He made 8 trips back to the beach to get more ammunition and to evacuate wounded, refusing evacuation himself despite being wounded. He was killed on March 1st. He was 23 years old. Private First Class Jacqueline H. Lucas was 17 years old, the youngest, Medal of Honor recipient in World War II. He'd lied about his age to enlist. On D+1, 2 Japanese grenades landed in his foxhole. Lucas threw himself on both grenades, absorbing the blast with his body to save his comrades. Miraculously, 1 grenade didn't detonate, and Lucas survived, though grievously wounded. Gunnery Sergeant William G. Harrell was leading his squad when a Japanese grenade landed among them. Harrell attempted to throw it back, but it exploded in his hand, severing both hands and mangling his arms. Despite this, he continued directing his squad using verbal orders until he was evacuated. He survived but lost both arms. Private First Class Douglas T. Jacobson single-handedly destroyed 16 Japanese positions in a single day, using bazookas, grenades, rifle fire, and captured Japanese weapons. When his rifle jammed, he picked up Japanese weapons and continued fighting. When those ran out, he used grenades. When grenades ran out, he used demolition charges. His citation reads like fiction, but it was witnessed by dozens of Marines. These men and 23 others represent thousands of acts of heroism that went unrecorded or unrecognized. For every Medal of Honor, there were dozens of silver stars, hundreds of bronze stars, thousands of purple hearts. Valor at Iwo Jima truly was common. The strategic debate, was it worth it? Even before the battle ended, a debate erupted in military and political circles. Was Iwo Jima worth the cost? The opposition argument was straightforward. 6,821 Americans died to capture 8 square miles of volcanic rock. That's over 850 deaths per square mile, a casualty density exceeded only by certain Civil War battlefields like Antietam. Critics argued that Iwo Jima could have been bypassed and left to wither on the vine, isolated by air and naval power, until it became strategically irrelevant. Chief among the critics was Admiral William Leahy, President Roosevelt's chief of staff. This was the first time in the war where American casualties exceeded the enemy's. Leahy wrote later, "That was the measure of our defeat." Leahy argued that strategic bombing could have neutralized Iwo Jima without invasion, and that the airfields, while useful, were essential to victory. The defenders of the operation pointed to the numbers. Between March 1945 and the end of the war in August, 2,400 B-29 superfortresses made emergency landings on Iwo Jima. Each B-29 carried an 11-man crew. That's over 26,000 airmen whose lives were potentially saved by having Iwo Jima available as an emergency airfield. If even half of those planes would have crashed at sea without Iwo Jima, that's 13,000 lives saved, almost double the American deaths in capturing the island. P-51 Mustang fighters based on Iwo Jima escorted B-29 raids from April through August 1945. The B-29 loss rate dropped from approximately 10% to 1% after P-51 escorts became available. Over those months, hundreds of B-29s were saved from Japanese interceptors. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan intensified dramatically after Iwo Jima's capture. With fighters providing escort and bombers carrying full loads, the tonnage of bombs dropped on Japan increased exponentially. This contributed to Japan's decision to surrender without an invasion of the home islands. And that's the crucial point. Without Iwo Jima, the pressure on Japan might have been insufficient to force surrender without a full-scale invasion. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan scheduled for November 1945, estimated American casualties at 500,000 to over 1 million, with Japanese casualties potentially reaching several million. If capturing Iwo Jima contributed to Japan's decision to surrender without that invasion, then 6,821 deaths might have prevented a million. The debate continues among historians. What's undeniable is that Iwo Jima was a tactical victory achieved at strategic cost. Whether that cost was justified depends on assumptions about what would have happened without it, and those assumptions can never be proven. Iwo Jima fundamentally changed American thinking about amphibious assault and defensive warfare. The battle proved that heavily fortified positions could not be reduced by bombardment alone. The three-day naval bombardment before D-Day had accomplished almost nothing against deep fortifications. Future operations would require longer bombardments, better intelligence, and new weapons specifically designed for cave and tunnel warfare. The importance of combined arms was reinforced. Infantry alone couldn't reduce Japanese positions. Tanks, artillery, flamethrowers, demolitions, air support, and naval gunfire all had to work together, coordinated at the squad and platoon level. This combined arms approach would become standard doctrine. The flamethrower emerged as the most effective weapon for reducing fortified positions. Portable flamethrowers and flame-throwing tanks became essential equipment for Pacific operations. After Iwo Jima, every assault platoon had designated flamethrower teams. Kuribayashi's defensive tactics represented a revolution in military thinking. His use of underground fortifications, his refusal to waste lives in futile banzai charges, his emphasis on killing power over holding ground. These concepts influenced defensive doctrine for decades. The North Koreans used tunnel defenses extensively during the Korean War. Learning directly from Japanese experience at Iwo Jima, the Viet Cong tunnel complexes in South Vietnam showed similar thinking. Even modern military forces study Kuribayashi's defense as an example of how a smaller force can inflict maximum casualties on a superior attacker. The battle also highlighted the limitations of defense. Kuribayashi fought brilliantly, inflicted terrible casualties, and delayed the American advance far beyond expectations. But he still lost. Defensive warfare can impose costs, but cannot achieve victory when the attacker has overwhelming material superiority and is willing to pay the price. Even after the battle ended, Iwo Jima continued to serve American strategic purposes and continued to claim lives. The airfields were expanded and improved. Engineers from the Navy Seabees worked around the clock to lengthen runways, build hard stands for aircraft, and construct support facilities. The first damaged B-29 made an emergency landing on March 4th while the battle was still raging. By war's end, 2,400 B-29s had used Iwo Jima as an emergency airstrip. P-51 Mustang squadrons arrived in April and began flying escort missions to Japan. The 7th Fighter Command based on Iwo Jima flew over 2,700 combat sorties before war's end, claiming 101 Japanese aircraft destroyed. But Japanese soldiers remained hidden in the tunnel systems. Isolated holdouts continued fighting, emerging at night to steal supplies or attack American positions. The last organized resistance ended in late April, but individuals and small groups held out for months. 2 Japanese soldiers didn't surrender until January 1949, nearly 4 years after the battle ended. Clearing the island required methodical, dangerous work. Engineers systematically sealed caves with explosives, often under fire from holdouts. Unexploded ordnance littered the island: mines, grenades, artillery shells, bombs. Over the decades, these munitions killed construction workers, military personnel, and Japanese civilians who returned to the island after the war. The United States occupied Iwo Jima until 1968, when it was returned to Japanese sovereignty along with the other Ogasawara Islands. Today, it's administered by the Japan Self-Defense Forces and remains closed to civilians. The island is still considered dangerous due to unexploded ordnance and unstable tunnels. Many of the caves remain unexplored. The Battle of Iwo Jima left scars on everyone who survived it. The psychological trauma was profound and lifelong. John Doc Bradley, one of the 6 flag raisers on Mount Suribachi, never spoke about Iwo Jima to his family. His children learned about his role in the famous photograph only after his death. He attended some Marine Corps reunions, but found them painful. The weight of survival, knowing that 3 of the 6 flag raisers died within days of the photograph, never left him. A.R.A. Hayes, another flag raiser, struggled with alcoholism and depression after the war. He was treated as a hero, touring the country to promote war bonds, but he felt like a fraud. He'd raised a flag while better men died around him. He died in 1955 at age 32, found dead of exposure and alcohol poisoning on the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona. Thousands of other survivors carried similar burdens. Combat fatigue, what we now call PTSD, afflicted many Marines for decades. Nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, survivor's guilt, these became constant companions. Many self-medicated with alcohol, some committed suicide. The Veterans Administration hospitals treated Iwo Jima veterans for psychological trauma into the 1990s, but there were also stories of resilience. Many veterans built successful lives, raised families, and contributed to their communities. They rarely spoke about Iwo Jima. The memories were too painful, but when they did, they spoke of the men who didn't come back. Their heroism, they insisted, belonged to the dead, not the living. In 1954, the Marine Corps' War Memorial was dedicated in Arlington, Virginia, near Arlington National Cemetery. The memorial is a bronze statue based on Joe Rosenthal's photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. It stands 78 feet tall, weighing 100 tons, and is one of the most recognized war memorials in the world. The memorial is dedicated to all Marines who have died in service to their country since 1775, but it's forever associated with Iwo Jima. The 6 flag raisers are immortalized in bronze, frozen in that moment of struggle and triumph. 3 of them never knew the memorial would exist. They died on Iwo Jima before the battle ended. Every year on November 10th, the Marine Corps' birthday, and on Memorial Day, a flag-raising ceremony is held at the memorial. Veterans attend, fewer each year as the Iwo Jima generation passes away. They stand before that bronze monument, remembering friends who didn't come home, remembering 36 days in hell. The memorial's inscription reads simply, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue." The Battle of Iwo Jima stands as a testament to several enduring truths about warfare and human nature. First, it demonstrated that courage and determination, while admirable, cannot overcome material superiority indefinitely. Kuribayashi fought brilliantly. His men fought with discipline and dedication. They inflicted terrible casualties and delayed the American advance far beyond expectations. But they were outgunned, outnumbered, and cut off from resupply. The outcome was never in doubt, only the cost. Second, It showed that victory in war isn't clean or glorious. It's brutal, grinding work purchased with blood. The Marines who took Iwo Jima weren't superhuman warriors. They were ordinary young men, teenagers and 20-somethings, mostly who did extraordinarily difficult things because their duty demanded it. Many died. Those who survived carried the scars forever. Third, it proved that some strategic objectives justify terrible costs if those costs prevent even worse outcomes. Did 6,821 American deaths save 100,000 lives by averting an invasion of Japan? We'll never know for certain. But the B-29 crews who landed safely on Iwo Jima, the bomber crews who survived because P-51s protected them, the invasion forces who never had to storm Japanese beaches, they knew what Iwo Jima meant. Finally, it reinforced that in war, as in life, the price of victory is often paid by people who don't live to see it. 3 of the 6 flag raisers on Mount Suribachi died before the battle ended. They never knew their image would become iconic. They never knew they'd be immortalized in bronze. They just did their job and died doing it. The flag still flies over the Marine Corps' War Memorial in Arlington. It flies over the graves at Arlington National Cemetery, where many Iwo Jima veterans now rest. And it flies over the island itself, where Japanese and American veterans occasionally return for remembrance ceremonies, old enemies now bound by shared understanding of what they endured. Iwo Jima matters not because it was glorious, it wasn't. It matters because it was necessary, costly, and ultimately successful. It represents the worst of war and the best of those who fight wars. It stands as a reminder that freedom isn't free, that strategic objectives require sacrifice, and that uncommon valor, when demanded by circumstances, becomes a common virtue among uncommon people. If this story has moved you, honor the memory of those who fought at Iwo Jima by learning more about their sacrifice. Visit the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia, where Iwo Jima is commemorated in detail. Visit the Marine Corps' War Memorial in Arlington. Read the memoirs and histories, books like Flags of Our Fathers by James Bradley, With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge, or Iwo Jima, Legacy of Valor by Bill Ross. If you're a veteran, reach out to veteran support organizations. The wounds of war don't always heal, but talking to others who understand can help. Organizations like the Wounded Warrior Project, the Veterans Crisis Line, and local VA hospitals provide support. If you're a student of history, dig deeper into the Pacific War. Iwo Jima was one battle in a vast conflict that reshaped the world. Understanding it helps us understand the price of the freedom we enjoy today. Share this story. The generation that fought at Iwo Jima is almost gone. Soon there will be no living witnesses to these events. But their story, their sacrifice, their courage, their determination must not be forgotten. Tell others, remember them, honor them, because uncommon valor should never become a forgotten virtue. Thank you for listening.